Protests erupt in Pakistan over Imran Khan's detention amid police clashes and internet blackouts. Hi folks, I am your host Dan, and you are watching Blazing Star TV News. Security forces launch nighttime operation in Islamabad. On Tuesday, Pakistan's security forces launched a major operation to disperse thousands of protesters supporting jailed former Prime Minister Imran Khan. The demonstration, which took place in the capital Islamabad, came after protesters broke through barricades and gathered outside the city demanding Khan's release. Lockdown, internet blackouts, and roadblocks across the country. Authorities imposed a sweeping security lockdown across Pakistan, including a total internet blackout in key regions as protesters advanced toward the capital. Major roads leading to Islamabad were barricaded to prevent access to the city. Interior Minister Mohsin Naqvi warned that protesters could remain on the outskirts but threatened extreme measures if they entered the city. Clashes between protesters and security forces. Defying government warnings, the protesters reached the high-security red zone at the heart of Islamabad, where they clashed with security forces. Tear gas was deployed, and reports indicate several fatalities, primarily among the security forces, as tensions escalated. The violent unrest also led to a large number of arrests. Khan's party calls for temporary halts to protests. On Wednesday, Khan's party, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf (PTI), announced that they were calling off the protests for the time being following the violent crackdown. The decision came after the authorities had arrested hundreds of protesters, and reports of deaths continued to mount. Protests begin with Long March from Peshawar. The protests began on Sunday with a convoy of vehicles setting off from the city of Peshawar. The demonstrators, led by Khan's wife Bushra Bibi and key PTI leader Ali Amin Gandapur, aimed to reach Islamabad's D Chowk, a key square near Pakistan's parliament. Police attempted to block their path using tear gas and shipping containers, but protesters continued their march, defying a two-day lockdown and rally ban. Violence and deaths in the streets. As the protesters reached the outskirts of Islamabad on Monday, the situation turned violent. Protesters clashed with police, and fires broke out on highways, with reports of at least 22 police vehicles being set on fire. By Tuesday, 6 people, including for security officials, had died in the unrest, with reports suggesting a car had rammed into security forces during the protests. Security forces raid protest site at D Chowk. By Tuesday night, security forces raided D Chowk to clear the protesters, arresting hundreds. Though Khan had urged his supporters to fight to the end, PTI later called for a pause in the demonstrations, citing the government's brutality. Minister threatens extreme measures against protesters. Interior Minister Mohsin Naqvi warned that further protests would lead to extreme measures, including curfews and military intervention. He emphasized that security forces had been authorized to use force, even suggesting that rangers could open fire on protesters. Anyone who reaches here will be arrested, he added. PTI accuses government of using excessive force. PTI accused the government of using excessive force to suppress peaceful protests, claiming that security forces fired bullets at demonstrators. Reports suggested around 24 protesters were injured, but communication has been difficult due to internet blackouts. Why are Pakistanis protesting? The protests stem from a combination of issues. Khan's supporters demand his release and the release of other political prisoners. They also oppose a controversial new constitutional amendment that gives the government greater control over the selection of superior court judges. Many of Khan's supporters argue that the February 2023 elections were not free and fair, claiming that Khan's removal was orchestrated by the military in a stolen mandate. Khan's political struggles and continued popularity. Khan, who was ousted from office in a parliamentary no-confidence vote in 2022, has since led a strong opposition campaign, accusing the current government, led by Prime Minister Sharif, of colluding with the military to remove him. His detention has intensified the ongoing political confrontation between his party, PTI, and Pakistan's powerful military establishment. Despite being jailed for over a year and facing numerous criminal charges, Khan remains popular, and his calls for protests continue to spark unrest. Ongoing unrest amid growing national security concerns. The protests come at a particularly sensitive time for Pakistan, which has been grappling with increasing sectarian violence and separatist attacks. These recent protests further complicate the country's fragile security situation, as the clash between the military,